and what we hid between the pages. I used to believe the safest place to hide a secret was in plain sight. Turns out the safest place is a library book that hasn't been checked out in a decade, the one nobody wants because the last chapter is missing. That's where I left the note that started all of this, and where I found the proof that nearly ended me. My name is Ethan. I run communications for a boutique M&A firm that dresses its appetites in tasteful fonts. By day, I translate greed into announcements investors can applaud. By night, I try to remember who I was before good lighting and careful statements became my entire personality. I've been with Naomi for 4 years. She is brilliant at her work. Museum acquisitions, donors who call themselves patrons because it sounds like a prayer, and brilliant at leaving a room just before you realize it's colder without her. We were fine until we were not. The drift was a temperature thing. She began to come home smelling like cedar and a citrus that wasn't ours, phone face down, voice softened by the kind of carefulness that confesses everything even as it says nothing. I told myself to trust her. Trust is a muscle, I said, and ours had simply been underused. Then one afternoon she texted me 3 words we hadn't used in months: take the escalator. I was at the Central Library downtown, a cathedral for quiet people with unquiet minds, prepping remarks for a conference we didn't need to attend but were sponsoring anyway. The escalator rides up between glass walls that frame the city like a moral you haven't earned. On the 3rd floor, the humanities stacks smell like paper taught to stand straight. Under architecture, the space where I usually hide to write, a slip of handwriting peeked out from a book about Frank Lloyd Wright. It was Naomi's, the slant of the N giving her away like a blush. The note said, "If you're here, you're late. If you're late, turn to page 314. I turned the book in my hands. It was the only copy. Page 314 had been cut out with the care of someone who uses knives for more than cooking. In its absence, a second note waited, taped to the spine. "We've been copying what we once built," it read. "Meet me where the ceiling remembers." I didn't have to think. Our joke from years earlier, the museum's old reading room with the ornate plaster overhead, a place we once hid during a gala, kissing like we were being sponsored by hunger. It was 5 p.m. I could see my reflection faint and doubled in the glass, and in that moment I hated and loved both versions of me. Man who works too much, man who runs when Naomi asks. I left the library to the sound of the escalator counting me out. The museum looked like money pretending to be marble. The reading room had been closed for renovations for months, but the guard at the side door glanced at the invitation on my phone and waved me through. In the long hall, my steps sounded like I was rehearsing. The reading room door was ajar, a kindness I did not deserve. Inside, dusk glowed like something particular falling, and the ceiling, coffered and cracked, looked back with its 100 eyes. Naomi stood under a panel where a cherub looked bored. "You came," she said, not surprised. "You left a trail any book would be proud of," I said. She smiled and then didn't. "We're being audited," she said, and I heard the "we" she meant. The museum, her reputation, the way donors like their money to be seen and not traced. There's a donor whose money isn't clean. The board wants to pretend it is. They've asked me to say the right words. They've asked me to be charming and concise. "You are both when you want to be," I said. "I don't want to be," she said. "Not this time." "I still don't know why we're in a closed room," I said. "Because being brave in person requires fewer sentences than I'm used to." She looked at my mouth like it had betrayed me in another life. "Because I need help," she said, "and because I needed to see if I still know how to want you. It would be tidier if I told you I stepped back with principle. The truth is desire arrives wearing whatever coat it finds on the hook. The room smelled like old varnish and her perfume, and a memory I didn't trust. When she reached up to touch the back of my neck, my hands found her waist in a reflex I had not unlearned. We kissed like people who remembered an address, not a map. When she pulled away, her breath was a confession. "There's a man," she said, "who thinks he's bought the museum twice, once with money, once with me." "Who is he?" "Marcelo Ardent," she said. It should have sounded invented. It didn't. The name had been in my inbox that morning. Our firm was advising on his acquisition of a private collection, the kind of transaction that launders taste. "He sent you notes?" I asked. "He sent me keys," she said, and the way she said keys made the back of my teeth ache. "To rooms where deals get made and women become Daker. I didn't use them, not the way he wanted. I need you to help me ruin him politely." Ruin him politely is a sentence that fits my tongue too well. I looked at her and wanted three incompatible things: to save her, to punish her for needing saving, and to ask if anyone else had held her in this room while the ceiling remembered. "Why me?" I asked. "Why not the lawyer the board keeps for disasters?" "Because the board thinks disasters are things that happen to budgets," she said. "You know better. And because you speak corporate like weather, you can predict storms and make people bring umbrellas." She slid a manila folder from her bag and set it on the table between us like an offering. Inside, invitations, emails, photos cropped to imply but never convict. In one, Marcelo stood with his hand barely touching the back of Naomi's dress, a respectful accident. In another, a key lay on a cocktail napkin, a brass skeleton unashamed. In the corner of one photo, the edge of a man's face looked like me and wasn't. "He wants inevitability," she said softly, "to show that even the woman who knows what art is will belong to him in the end." "Did you ever?" I started, because cruelty is a blade you sharpen on questions. "No," she said, steady. "I stood outside a door and thought about it. I thought about receiving. I thought about how receiving is a skill that looks like consent. Then I texted you. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt like a man who had stopped a fire only after smelling smoke on his clothes. What's your plan?" "The board meets at the Marlowe Hotel tomorrow," she said. "Penthouse, of course, because the view helps them believe in their own altitude. Marcelo will present the gift agreement. He'll want me to present the narrative. The museum saved, the collection safe. I want to replace the deck with something that stings but doesn't scar us." "Evidence." "Suggestion," she said. "Enough to make them flinch and demand clean money, not enough to burn the building down." It was the sort of needle I thread for a living. I took the folder, and because I am sometimes a worse man than I pretend, I asked, "If I hadn't come, who would you have called?" She looked like a person who'd been swimming too long. "Him," she said, and I would have said yes to something I didn't want just to make the story easier. We didn't touch after that. We stood under the cracked ceiling and practiced being a problem together. When I left, the guard glanced up like he knew I was a man walking home with more than paper. At the office, I built a deck that told the truth kindly. Line by line, a story of reputational risk for the museum, for the board, for anyone with a name longer than their shadow. I wove in headlines that had exploded other institutions when donors became scandals. I made it impossible to pretend we didn't know. I also wrote remarks that made Naomi the weather, turning what would have been a storm into a controlled rain. One slide, single sentence, white background, read, "A gift without clean provenance is a loan with hidden interest." At midnight my inbox chimed. A new message from an address I didn't know, subject, page 314. Inside, a single photo. Naomi in the reading room taken from the stacked doorway while we were kissing. Another, me walking away. The last, a close-up of the brass key on a napkin, initials MA etched with vanity. Beneath one line, choose the ending. Love the archivist. I have been threatened before, but not like that. Threats on letterhead like to wear their options. This one used memory as leverage. I forwarded it to a private folder and felt my stomach remember what fear is for. At noon the next day, the Marlowe's elevator delivered me to an hour I didn't trust. The penthouse was glass and beige and lilies trying too hard. The board sat like a row of agreed-upon portraits. Naomi was already there, spine straight, mouth unpainted as if to signal seriousness. Marcelo stood by the window, silhouetted against skyline, the posture of men who think horizon is a personal resource. "Ethan," he said, as if we'd met at a club I couldn't afford, "we're lucky to have you." "Luck is for people who don't plan," I said, setting my laptop down. The meeting started with the illusions. Slides of paintings that could make even a bad man generous, charts of visitor spikes, a rendering of a new wing shaped like a promise. Then Naomi introduced the brief communications update, which is what I'd named the blade. She spoke calmly, beautifully, the way she does when she wants to convince a room that saying no is a kind of love. "Transparency is not a press strategy," she said. "It's a habit." She clicked to the sentence slide. The line landed. I watched 3 board members shift as if they had been adjusting for years and finally found alignment. Marcelo's jaw altered by a single degree. "We are here for art, not purity contests," he said warmly. "Everyone in this room lives in the real world." "The real world has reporters," I said, "and auditors and Wikipedia." He smiled like he was training a dog. "Do you believe in redemption, Mr. Hale?" "I believe in receipts," I said. Naomi clicked again. Images, headlines, comparables, and then the last slide, a photograph from the library stacks, page 314, the book missing a chapter, the caption, "We do not accept incomplete narratives." Only Naomi and I knew the other meaning. I felt something in my chest sit down and take off its coat. Marcelo looked at her as if he had discovered an unsellable quality. "I had hoped," he said softly, "that we were building something." "We are," Naomi said. "We're building policy." The chair of the board, a woman who had never been managed by a man like Marcelo, cleared her throat. "We'll need to review the conditions, all of them. If the gift is clean, we accept. If not, we decline. We don't curate our collection with someone else's dirt under the frame." It should have ended there. I should have left with Naomi and a clean moral. Instead, Marcelo raised his glass a fraction and said, "Before we all virtue signal ourselves into sainthood, I have a small presentation." He nodded at the AV tech. The screen flickered. The reading room appeared. Naomi and me from the doorway, our kiss respectful and damning. Marcelo didn't look at us. He watched the board watch us. "We all have rooms," he said. "We are all improved by generosity." It was almost elegant, the way he made our private moment a currency. Naomi's hand found the edge of the table and didn't grip it. I stepped forward and spoke as if my blood wasn't loud. "A museum dedicated to beauty," I said, "should be the last place to confuse intimacy with leverage." That footage was captured without consent in a public institution. We can discuss the technical and legal concerns, but the ethical ones are easier. If this is how you behave before a gift, we can imagine what you expect after one. Silence does a lot of work in a room like that. The chair turned to Naomi. "Ms. Levin." Naomi met Marcelo's gaze and didn't blink. "We decline the gift," she said, respectfully, indefinitely. And that was that. It should have ruined us, and maybe it did in the ways that feel like growing pains. The board moved on to other donors. Marcelo left the city to find another building that would let him buy its dignity wholesale. On the sidewalk outside, the sunlight felt like something you pay extra for. Naomi and I stood close enough to look like we belonged to the same plan. He had a camera at the library, she said. He had an archivist, I said, and an appetite for other people's stories. Do you hate me? She asked very quietly. I hate that you needed me to save you from a story you helped write, I said. I hate that I liked saving you. I did too, she said. I'm sorry. I am too, I said, but I'm also here. I took her hand. It felt like a decision. We didn't fix everything that afternoon. We went to the library. We returned the architecture book to its shelf. On page 314's absence, I slipped a new note. We are not copying the past today, it read. But we might be revising. We returned the key. Yes, she'd kept it to the information desk in a plain envelope. The librarian looked at us like she'd been cast in a scene with too little direction and too much consequence. At home, we invented a small ritual we could keep. Once a week we picked a book neither of us had read and left each other a sentence between the pages. Not a riddle, not a test. A line that wanted to be remembered. Sometimes it was mine, sometimes hers. Sometimes we forgot and that became the message. I'm tired, forgive me. We made coffee in the mornings and kissed in the doorway like punctuation and let our phones live face up on the table like furniture. We didn't become saints. There were nights she came home smelling like boardrooms and compromise, and I wanted to interrogate her mouth instead of kiss it. There were days I wrote press lines so elegant they erased harm, and then had to relearn the math of what it cost me. But we kept something we hadn't held in a while. The habit of telling each other the line before it became a headline. Every so often, I pass the library escalator and see my face reflected twice, and I like the coexistence. The man who did the unforgivable corporate thing made a deck that saved a reputation, and the man who did the necessary human thing chose the person in front of him over the weapon he could have used. The reading room reopened after the ceiling was repaired. The cherub no longer looks bored. When light hits it at 4 in the afternoon, it looks like a witness choosing to forgive. Last week, tucked in a book about incomplete symphonies, I found a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. Some endings, it said, are just an agreement to keep turning the page together. I showed it to Naomi over tea. She read it, smiled, and placed it back where I found it. Leave it for someone else, she said. Maybe two people who think love is a plot when it's really just a library. Loud in the wrong places, quiet where it matters, full of copies no one asked for, and one shelf where we keep the originals. When we left, we checked out nothing and everything. We walked home without rushing, and the city behaved like it didn't need to know. That night we made love like editing. Cut what didn't serve us, kept the parts that did, and let the sentence end where it needed to. After, she lay with her ear on my chest and said, "You write weather for a living, but you made a climate for us." "Climate is just whether that stayed," I said. "Then stay," she said. So I did, and when the next morning asked for a headline, we agreed on one we could live with. We are still here. We are still reading. We are still hiding notes where only we know to look.